Hi, this is Paul Kreutz, and welcome to Halloween How To. In this edition, I am going to show you how to build this creepy animated living tombstone. With this Halloween prop, the sculpted face on this haunted tombstone seems to have come alive. How is it done? Well, I'm going to show you how. So let's get started. Here are some of the items that you will need to build this prop. But first, let's take a quick, simplified overview of what we will be building. We are going to take a piece of masonite, and on one side, we will attach a three-dimensional face. On the flip side, we will turn it into a mini trampoline by attaching springs to all four corners. This will allow it to move freely in many directions. Hovering over it, we will mount a programmable motor with a rotating arm. Attached to the end of the arm is a wheel that will push down on the edge of the masonite. As the arm rotates, its pushing on the masonite effectively animates the attached face to seem as if it is looking up, down, and side to side. The most important item is this electric motor available from Fright Props. This high-torque motor comes in a kit with a controller and power supply. Now with this controller, you can custom program a 60-second cycle of the motor going forwards and backwards, speeding up, slowing down, as well as stopping and starting. You can either have the controller repeat the program in a continuous loop or have it trigger activated. You could also use a fixed speed deer motor or a rotisserie motor, but they will not give you the variable animation. You will also need a 4-inch shaft arm, an oval frame of wood, plastic, or foam with an inner dimension no less than 10 inches by 13 inches, a small wheel, such as this drawer guide roller, 4 light-duty springs, adhesive caulking, bakeable sculpting clay, a styrofoam mannequin head, the more detailed the better, a 10-inch by 10-inch piece of 1/8 inch thick masonite board, some craft foam sheets in different thicknesses, and some of this very stretchy fabric. Make sure that the fabric you use is at least 18% spandex and in a color that will work for your tombstone. Since everything is going to be mounted to the front and back of the tombstone, I found that a 2-foot by 4-foot by 5/8 inches thick piece of plywood works best. In addition, at most larger lumber and hardware stores, this size is usually a pre-cut, stock, off-the-shelf item. Locate on one side of the plywood where you would like the frame to be. In my case, I marked the center of the plywood from side to side and then down 12 inches for my center location of the frame that I am using. Trace the inside of the frame as well as the outside with a marker and remove the frame. You can also mark how you would like the eventual shape of the tombstone to be. Just make sure that you leave at least 6 inches from that mark to the outer frame mark. You will need to mark on the plywood the outline of the styrofoam head, but first we need to cut it in half. I use the center seam as my guide to cut the head in half. Also cut off the ears as well as the neck. Use the cut off piece of styrofoam to effectively sand the cut areas in order to knock off any of the loose styrofoam bits. Measure the face height and width and transfer those measurements to the plywood, making sure that those measurements are equal distance from the frame's center mark on the plywood. Place the face inside that mark and trace around it. This will give you an accurate shape outline of the face. Then draw another outline by measuring 3/8 of an inch out from that outline. This will be your cut mark because you want the hole to be slightly larger than the actual face. Now let's turn our attention back to the piece of masonite. On it, draw diagonal lines from corner to corner. Place the masonite onto the plywood, making sure that its center mark lines up with the frame's center mark on the plywood. Extend those same diagonal lines as well as the masonite's outline onto the plywood with a marker. On the masonite square, make a mark 1/2 inch from each of the corners. Here you will drill a 1/8 inch hole, like this. Next, attach the styrofoam face to the rough side of the masonite by using an appropriate glue, one that will not melt the styrofoam. I help this process along by first placing a pre-drilled square dowel in the center of the back of the face and then screwing the piece of masonite to it, holding it in place till the glue sets. Make sure that the face is in the exact center of the masonite and that the smooth side faces out and is unobstructed, other than the set screw that is in the very center. You can now cut away the face hole with the jigsaw, as well as those upper portions of the plywood that will give the tombstone its shape. Attach 1x3 pine flat stock on edge at the perimeter of the plywood to give the look of thickness to the tombstone and to help hide the eventual inner workings. Make sure that all of the markings on the plywood are on the inside side of the tombstone. Flip the tombstone over. We are now ready to attach the fabric to the face of the tombstone. Place an oversized piece of the fabric over the face hole and then the frame over it. Mark on the fabric the outside of the frame. Cut away that fabric. Using a staple gun, staple the fabric to the plywood, making sure that you staple as close to the edge of the face hole as possible. I was able to line up the front of the staple gun to the edge of the face hole by feeling it with my finger. The embedded staples were then about 1/8 of an inch away from the hole's edge. When complete, it should look like this, with the staples evenly spaced around the perimeter of the face hole. Glue the remaining outer ring of fabric to the plywood. While that is drying, let's turn our attention to the flip side. Remember those extended diagonal lines drawn onto the plywood? We'll make a mark on each line around 4 inches away from the masonite's corner marks. On each of these marks, we will be securing a 3-inch grabber or deck screw, screwing into the plywood only a 1/2 inch so that we don't come through the other side. We will eventually be attaching a spring to the tops of each of the screws. So to keep the spring from slipping down, slide a piece of 2.5-inch vinyl tubing over each screw before screwing it to the plywood. Remember, our end goal is to create a mini trampoline with a piece of masonite, using the springs and the stretchy fabric to keep everything in place, yet still allowing for free movement in all directions. Next, we need to attach the styrofoam face to the fabric. We need to push the face into the fabric so that the masonite is about 1 inch away from the plywood. Use a spacer such as this piece of styrofoam behind the masonite square to accomplish that when you slowly lower the tombstone over the styrofoam face. Using your fingers, feel and make sure that the face is evenly spaced away from the edges of the hole on all sides. Using 1.5-inch nails, push them through the fabric and into the styrofoam at the low-lying areas that will bring out the facial features, such as the nose, eyes, and mouth, as well as the perimeter of the head. When done, test the movement of the head by using your hand on the masonite to rotate it in all directions to make sure that the styrofoam is not hitting the plywood edge anywhere. Once satisfied, individually pull out each nail about a 1/2 inch. Put some glue on the nail and push it back into place. The end result, with the nails glued into place, should look like this. I created the eyes by using 3/4 inch diameter wood beads cut in half. The concave iris is created with a drill bit. The upper and lower lids were sculpted with a bakeable clay, and once hardened in the oven, were glued into place. A small hole is drilled into the center of each iris, and a small finish nail is used for the pupil. I use some tape at the end of the finish nail as a spacer to keep the pupil flush with the eyeball. Secure the eye with glue, along with pushing the nail into the styrofoam. I sculpted the face using the latex adhesive caulking to create the face's details. I used it for the hair, sideburns, and eyebrows, much like you would when piping icing to decorate a cake. Add layers once the first layer has dried. I used larger amounts of the adhesive caulking for the nose, chin, jowls, and eye area, using a small wet paintbrush to both work the caulking into the fabric and to quickly shape it. To hide the perimeter staples that hold the fabric onto the plywood, I skim-coated over them with the caulking. When creating the neck and shoulders, I found that I needed to move the frame down slightly to give me more room. I then sketched the neck and shoulders on a piece of paper and used the craft foam sheets to create the shoulders, collar, and ears. A doubled over piece of the spandex fabric was used to create the ascot. I then carefully glued everything into place. I was able to color match the spandex fabric with the flat latex paint. Base coat everything, but leave as much of the fabric as possible unpainted as to not restrict its stretchiness. Since the dark gray fabric color worked well for the low light areas, I mixed white paint with it for the main color of the face and tombstone. I then used a near black for the deepest shadows and a near white for the highlights, creating a monochromatic end effect using only those 4 colors. To finish attaching the masonite into place, hook a spring to each of the 4 holes at the corners and then attach those to the 4 3-inch screw tops. The electric motor now needs to hover over the top of it. So first, attach it to a piece of 1/2 inch thick wood flat stock by drilling the appropriate holes for the mounting screws as well as the main rotating axis. Attach the drawer guide wheel to the end of the 4-inch shaft arm with the small nut and bolt, making sure that the wheel's direction is perpendicular to the shaft. Then attach the arm to the mounted motor. 2 simple L brackets built out of the same wood flat stock and mounted to the plywood on either side of the masonite board hold the mounted motor directly over the center of the masonite. Make sure that their height is such that the drawer guide wheel pushes the masonite nearly to, but not touching the plywood. You are now ready to follow the manufacturer's directions on how to program the controller for the motor. This might take several times until you get used to the wheel that determines the direction and speed of the motor, and until you get a 60-second program that is to your liking. Hide the back of the tombstone with some black fabric, but first cover the motor with a wire cage, such as this light bulb protector, to keep the two from touching. And you are now ready to put this prop to work. As you can see, this animated living tombstone would be a perfect prop for your Halloween graveyard haunt. We hope that you found this video helpful, and we invite you to subscribe to our YouTube channel so that we can continue to bring you these Halloween how-to videos. please have a safe, fun, and spooky Halloween. Thanks for watching.